A document briefly appeared on the Senate Legislative Council website at 11:47 last night. It stayed public for only 9 minutes before being removed. But in that short window, 3 congressional researchers downloaded it. And what that document contains explains why, right now, the U.S. government is effectively operating without a clear chain of command. I need you to follow this channel and turn on alerts, because what I'm about to explain will not be covered on cable news. This is not rumor. This is not opinion. This is a documented constitutional emergency unfolding right now. Before I explain what was in that document, you need to understand 3 separate events from the last 18 hours that the media is not linking together. A classified security briefing that activated continuity planning, a financial market signal that only appears before wars or coups, and a procedural move in Congress that allows lawmakers to act without presidential approval. These events happened independently, but all of them are preparing for the same possibility: a president who cannot or will not be restrained by constitutional limits. Let me explain exactly what's happening. Wednesday morning at 6, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs called an emergency meeting at the Pentagon. It was not on any public schedule. There was no press notification. But 3 defense officials confirmed it took place, and they confirmed the specific phrase used: continuity of government procedures. That phrase has a very specific meaning. Continuity of government is activated when leaders believe normal command structures could fail due to catastrophic events like nuclear war or major terrorist attacks. The last time it was formally reviewed at this level was after September 11th. It is never used casually. It is never part of routine briefings. When military leadership orders a review of continuity plans, they are preparing for the possibility that the normal chain of command may not function. That meeting happened at 6 a.m. 3.5 hours later, when markets opened, Treasury yields jumped immediately. For most people, bond markets seem abstract, but for institutional investors, they are an early warning system. And that morning, something extremely rare occurred. Goldman Sachs circulated an internal alert to major clients that was leaked within hours. One line in that memo stopped traders cold: institutional risk level raised to Category 4. That is the highest classification they use. It is reserved for only 2 situations: war or coup. Not recession. Not political instability. War or coup. That memo went out at market open. Then, about 4.5 hours later, at 2 p.m., Senate leadership quietly invoked an obscure parliamentary mechanism hidden inside Senate Rule 22. This maneuver allows legislation to be accelerated without requiring presidential approval under specific emergency conditions. There was no press statement, no public debate, just a procedural entry in the congressional record. But its effect is massive. It creates a legal path for Congress to act alone if the executive branch becomes dangerous or unresponsive. 3 branches, 3 different actions, all within 8 hours, all preparing for constitutional failure. Now here's what that 9-minute document actually said. Its title was Memorandum on Limits of Presidential Authority During National Security Emergencies. It was written by the Office of Senate Legal Counsel, a nonpartisan team of constitutional attorneys whose job is to advise the Senate on legal boundaries. It went live at 11:47 Tuesday night and was pulled 9 minutes later after objections from White House lawyers. But those 9 minutes were enough. The memo has 4 sections. The first analyzes constitutional authority and focuses on Article 1 versus Article 2. Article 1 gives lawmaking power to Congress. Article 2 grants executive authority to the President. The memo addresses a core question. When those powers collide, who prevails? It relies on decades of precedent, including a major Supreme Court case from 1952, Youngstown Sheet and Tube versus Sawyer. During the Korean War, President Truman seized steel factories to prevent production shutdowns, arguing national security required it. The Supreme Court rejected that argument and ruled that even during war, even for security, the president cannot override powers assigned to Congress. Commerce and domestic policy remain legislative authority. That ruling has shaped executive limits for 70 years. The memo uses this case to justify congressional authority to cancel presidential emergency actions, not merely advise or review them, but override them. The next section argues that the Senate can cancel emergency declarations by simple majority vote. This directly challenges the National Emergencies Act, which gives presidents wide discretion. The memo states that constitutional authority under Article 1 cannot be permanently surrendered, even if Congress previously passed laws granting emergency powers. Congress can reclaim that authority whenever it chooses. But what triggered immediate alarm was a paragraph later in the document. It states that if executive actions threaten constitutional order, Congress has inherent authority to temporarily suspend military command authority while courts review the situation. That means the Senate was outlining legal justification to strip the president of control over the armed forces. This was not academic theory. This was operational legal guidance. That line is what caused the document to be pulled. But another detail went mostly unnoticed. The final section listed 14 names, all senior legal officers from the State Department's Office of the Legal Advisor. These are career professionals, not political appointees, many with decades of service across multiple administrations. On Wednesday, all 14 submitted resignation letters at the same time. This office does not resign in protest. Their role is to provide legal guidance regardless of politics. When they all leave together, the message is clear. They will not provide legal justification for what they believe is coming. At the Pentagon, Joint Staff lawyers also circulated internal guidance that afternoon. The subject line focused on distinguishing lawful from unlawful orders. While this concept is part of military training, such guidance is not distributed to senior leadership unless illegal directives are anticipated. This memo went to generals and top legal officers, the people who must decide whether to execute presidential commands. Then the intelligence community acted. 5 agencies declined to share sensitive classified information with the White House, citing handling concerns. In plain language, they do not trust the president with the information. When multiple agencies independently limit access to the commander-in-chief, that is not political disagreement. That is institutional self-protection. Now consider how Senate Republicans responded. A meeting in McConnell's office included 6 senators, not the usual 4. Along with McConnell were Thune, Barrasso, Cornyn, Rounds, and Collins. Before this meeting, Senate legal counsel briefed leadership on something that has almost never been discussed in modern times: criminal liability for lawmakers who enable unconstitutional acts. They cited federal sedition conspiracy statutes. The warning was blunt. If senators knowingly approve powers that are later used to suspend elections or deploy troops domestically, they could face personal criminal exposure, not political fallout. Prison. McConnell framed the decision in 3 categories: political risk, electoral risk, and legal risk. Political risk, he said, they have handled for years. Electoral risk is rising, but survivable. Legal risk is permanent. Once indicted, careers end regardless of verdict. Cornyn shared polling showing that chaos linked to Trump is costing him in Texas. Collins referenced classified intelligence indicating domestic threats are rising. After discussion, all 6 agreed to send a formal letter to the White House, stating they would not expand emergency powers, would distance campaign support, and would back incumbents against Trump-backed challengers. But more importantly, they took action. Thursday morning, Senate Resolution 47 was introduced, affirming Senate authority over emergency declarations. Unlike ceremonial resolutions, this one contains binding procedural language. It states that regardless of executive declarations, the Senate can cancel emergencies by simple majority vote, effective immediately. That wording bypasses veto power, judicial delays, and executive objections. It relies on Article 1, Section 5, which grants each chamber authority over its own rules. Courts have repeatedly ruled that internal congressional procedures are not subject to judicial review. 17 Republicans have committed to support the measure, along with all Democrats and aligned independents. That totals 68 votes. Only 51 are required. The outcome is not uncertain, and constitutionally, the president cannot block it. This is where risk escalates. When leaders who seek absolute power are constrained, they often escalate before retreating. History shows that pressure leads to confrontation, not compromise. There are three likely paths forward. 1. The president backs down, reframes the loss as victory, and moves on. Low probability. 2. He challenges the resolution in court, orders agencies to ignore it, and creates legal deadlock while seeking sympathetic rulings. This is the most likely outcome. 3. He declares separate emergencies and uses domestic deployment laws to override Congress, forcing immediate impeachment and potential military conflict between branches. That is the nightmare scenario, but not impossible. International allies are already reacting. NATO convened an emergency meeting to assess U.S. political stability. That has never happened before. Intelligence sharing agreements were quietly tightened because allied agencies no longer trust the current administration with sensitive material. European leaders are drafting sanctions frameworks used against countries that undermine democratic institutions. China raised military readiness near Taiwan as U.S. domestic instability grows. For decades, global stability relied on the assumption that the United States was predictable. When that assumption collapses, strategic calculations shift worldwide. What happens next could follow several paths. Congress could succeed quickly and restrict emergency authority. Courts could delay resolution for months. Impeachment could fail and prolong stalemate. Or the cabinet could invoke the 25th Amendment, triggering its own constitutional battle. But what brought us here is undeniable. A legal memo pulled within minutes. Agencies withholding cooperation. Senators crossing party lines to protect institutional authority. Allies preparing for American instability. Markets reacting as if war or coup are possible. This is not just about one president. This is about whether constitutional systems still function under modern pressure, whether institutions can restrain concentrated power, whether democratic structures can defend themselves against authoritarian behavior. If emergency powers are contained, future presidents remain bound by limits. If they are not, those limits may never exist again. This moment is about law versus personal rule, institutions versus individuals, and whether the Constitution still works when it is truly tested.